We are moving on to task 4, and task 4 involves using lots of different types of functions. And the first scenario, our boss wants us to display invoice number and terms ID from the invoices table, which is in the AP database. And they want us to look at the terms ID and display different messages based on the number in the terms ID column. Anytime you want to look at one column's value and display different messages for different values, that's a good opportunity to utilize the case function. So we are going to be using the case function in this first little scenario. So I'm going to pause the video while I type all this in, and then we're going to talk about how the case function is set up. So we are using the AP database. We've got 3 columns that we are going to generate. First one has the invoice number. Second one has the terms ID. And then the third one has a heading of terms. And it's either going to display net due in 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, depending on what value is in the terms column. So the value for terms is dependent on terms ID. Okay, you'll notice it starts with the keyword case. It's done when you see the word end, E-N-D. And then in between, we have the when clauses that are checking the different values. So when it is the number 1, then this is what it displays. Okay, you'll also notice that there are no commas at the end of these. So your when clauses are just individual lines looking at the different values and telling it what to do. Okay, and then we end our case function and we've given it an alias of terms. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And again, it's looking at each invoice, checking the terms ID, and displaying when the invoice is due. And we're going to go ahead and move our closing comment down. Our next scenario is the boss wants us to display invoices that are current, invoices that are 1 to 30 days past due, and invoices that are over 30 days past due. Okay, we'll be using the AP database again and the invoices table. So this is kind of similar to what we just did. We are going to use the case function, but we also need to use a date function because we need to look at the current date and we need to look at the invoice due date and see what the difference is in those dates. And then if it's over 30, we display a message, and if it's basically greater than 0, we display a different message. So a lot of what we have here can be reused. So I'm going to actually take all of this. I'm going to copy and paste it down here. And let's see, I'm going to make a little adjustment. Invoice number is correct. We'll keep that. But now we do not want terms ID. We want invoice total, invoice date, invoice due date. And we're going to keep the comma because we do want our case function in here. But instead of looking at a specific column, we need to look at the number of days that are different from the current date to the invoice due date. So we're going to start right with our when clause. And what we're checking instead of the number 1 is the date difference. And we specifically want to look at the day. We do not want to look at the month or the year. We're looking at the number of days. And we want to compare the invoice due date to the current date. So we're just going to use get date to retrieve our current date. So that's what we're looking at. And if it is greater than 30, then we're going to display over 30 days past due. Okay, so date diff is going to give us the number of days. Okay, if those days are greater than 30, it's going to display this message. Okay, and we need to do this again. So I'm going to copy the whole thing and adjust it for the second condition that we need to check. So the second thing that we need to check, we're still going to use date diff. We're still looking at the day, the invoice due date, and the current date. But now we're just checking to see if it's greater than 0. Because we said if it's 1 to 30 days, well, if it's over 30 days, it's automatically going to do this. If it's not over 30 days, it's going to come down and check this one. So we want between 1 and 30 days. So we're saying, is it greater than 0? Okay, if it is, then we're going to change the message to 1 to 30 days past due. Now, what happens if it's neither one of those? Okay, so the difference in the days isn't greater than 30, and the difference in the days is not greater than 0. Okay, well, we're going to include an else here. So if the difference basically is not greater than 0, that means they are not past due. So we're going to just display current, which means they are current on their payments. And here's the end of our case structure. And we're going to give this thing an alias of status. So let me get rid of that one. Now, the only other thing that the boss would like us to do is look at invoices that have a balance, right? Because if they don't have a balance, it doesn't really matter what the due date was because they don't owe us money. So we need a where clause on this. And where invoice total minus payment total minus credit total is greater than 0. Okay, and if we run that, we should see some results. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of rows to invoices with the current date. So I'm going to pause this for a second. And then I'll kind of walk through our insert statements, and then we're going to run this same query again. And instead of seeing everything 30 days past due, you'll actually see some things that are current. And that will kind of check the else portion of our case. Okay, so I've got insert into invoices. And then I basically set up columns that were required or dealt with dates, because that's what we're testing here. And so I'm giving it the invoice ID, which is required, 10, 20, 30, and 40. I am also giving it invoice number. And I'm giving it vendor ID. Now, invoice ID, I believe is being calculated. So this 10, 20, 30, 40 is our vendor ID, and the invoice number is 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, 13,000. Invoice date, we're just using get date. Because dates are numeric, we can add and subtract. So to get, in order to test the 1 to 30 and current, I'm using the current date and I'm also subtracting from it so that it'll be slightly old, but not over 30 days. Then we're giving it a total. We're giving it a payment total, a credit total. We're also giving it a terms ID. I just use 5 for all of them. The invoice due date is, you can see I've set it for different things. It's the current date minus 20, current date minus 10, current date plus 30, and current date. And then the payment date, I set for different values as well. I set one 10 days in the past. I set 2 of them to the current date and 1 to a date in the future. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move this down. And I'm going to run this so that I can insert these rows. And then I'm going to comment these out. And if you just put 2 minus signs in front, it'll comment them out. And that way, I can just move this closing comment up. And you have to remember to get rid of the highlighting. But then I can run this again, and I should see all my different values that I want to check. So you're going to have to scroll down, but you should see a couple that are current, and then a couple listed in the 1 to 30 days. And you can kind of see the dates that were used. Now, when you guys do this, it's probably going to show different dates than mine because everything is keyed on the current date. Okay, and I did that on purpose so that y'all could check and test the 1 to 30 days and current to make sure it works. And let's see, to finish up, after you see your output, you're just going to move the closing comment actually past your insert statements. So I'm going to resize this just a little bit, and we'll move it all the way down.